Now, ultramarine blue, and in fact many other blues as well, has a reputation for being very easy to lift from your paper. What that means is that once you set the color down on your page and let it dry and then try to paint over it again, the color comes off of your page. Now there's a few staining blues that are not as likely to do that, but ultramarine is not one of those. Ultramarine will definitely lift and come off. I love what ultramarine looks like though. I love it when it gets really intense. So your options then are to either try to get it very dark on a first pass, get a very concentrated amount of pigment on, and make sure you have it at the intensity level that you want for your final painting to be at. Or if you're going to layer, you have to very carefully and lightly move your brush over the surface so that you don't pull up the pigment from the surface of your page. Here are those blue washes that I just did dried, just to show you layering. So I would just do a second wash over here, and this is actually taking pretty well. But you can imagine that when larger areas you're trying to cover larger areas, it's much harder to get that smooth coverage without the brush strokes really showing. And I'm going to show you what I mean by lifting. This is just water on the brush, and this is the darker one. You see, as I brush across there, my color's actually getting lighter because the pigment's lifting out. So this happens every time you re-wet the surface, and it makes building up the intensity of the blues kind of tricky. You have to move quickly, you have to move your brush minimally across the surface, and you have to do it many, many times if you're going to build it up to a really deep, rich blue. Starting out with some titanium yellow and buff titanium, and I'm going to do a little bit, actually first before I do that, I'm going to use my kneaded eraser to lighten up the moon's outline because I don't want that much pencil for something that's going to be mostly white. Alright, so now that I've lightened that up, I'm doing a yellow wash right around the moon, avoiding the actual crescent itself. And I'm also going to get a little bit of this yellow in the lower portion here. And I'm being careless of my frame boundary because it's all going to be underneath a frame, so it's not something I need to worry about. Okay, I'll make that a little darker. Then I'm going to take my blue and do a very light wash over the entire upper branches of this tree. Coming in close around the moon, but not all the way. And then I'm going to let this first wash dry. Now I'm going to go back in and much more carefully do a glaze wash over the areas of the tree. And as I come in close to the moon, I do dilute my color so that it blends into the lighter area. And I try to keep a leading wet edge at all times. That doesn't dry out, because once your edge dries out, then you're going to have a visible boundary there. But as long as you keep things wet as you go, you will have a nice smooth continuation of color. Now the other thing I'm trying to do is I do want to keep my color fairly intense for the lifting reasons that I mentioned earlier, because it's going to be harder to do subsequent layers onto this blue. I'm going to show you another little trick I use with that as well, though. But the secondary reason why I like to keep the color as intense as possible as I do this, while still maintaining this blend into the light area around the moon, which can be tricky. The other reason I like to do that, keeping the color intense, is because I'm using Daniel Smith French Ultramarine here, and as with many Daniel Smith colors, this is one of their beautifully granulating pigments. Actually, many ultramarine blues will have some degree of granulation, and you're only going to get that granulating effect, however, when you have a concentrated enough amount of pigment moving in your water, the water on your page, I mean. So you have to have the right combination of moisture and pigment, because if there's not enough moisture, your pigment can't move and flow, and granulation happens when the pigment begins to clump up with other particles. And if you don't have enough pigment, then there's just no granulation action that's going to happen, because there's just not enough concentration of particles to make anything visually interesting on your page. So it's tricky to find the right balance of the two. But if you do get the right balance, you can get some really nifty effects happening in the textures of your paintings. I'm bringing this blue wash right up against the moon. I have to work fast. Don't want these bottom edge areas to dry out and leave hard edges. Fortunately, this is one benefit of an easily lifting color. If you do happen to let your leading edge dry out, you can recover from it by scrubbing at that area until the pigment reactivates and lifts, and then it is as if you were just continuing painting like this. One little corner here I missed. And I'm going to make this upper part darker as well. It's not quite wet, but it is on the dry-ish side. It's sort of damp up there, so my pigment is going to be able to blend still with my wetter areas. The tricky part is blending the area into the moon. Okay, now I am going to let this dry once again.
It takes about 10 minutes or so.